Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 40th episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. And for some of us, things may be getting back to a bit more of a normal. But you still may be naturally trying to process what's happening and what has happened and what's been happening. Many of us have been finding that we've been pedaling hard, but perhaps not really getting anywhere or not being recognised for the work that has been done during this difficult time, in addition to caring for our families. So how do you have the conversation with your manager or boss about what you want, whether that's a pay rise, to continue to work at home, work flexibly, or anything else? Well, I'm joined by two women who can definitely help you with that. Monica Mwanje and Michelle Jima. Monica is the founder of Creative Solutions. She provides strategic business development consultancy for organisations seeking growth in nuclear and other regulated sectors. She's successfully worked with organisations of all sizes, micro businesses through to multinationals that deliver professional services, engineering, and construction and technical services. Monica's worked in the male-dominated nuclear sector since 2003. She's a chartered chemical engineer. Her experience of working in and with multidisciplinary teams in both technical and business leadership roles informs and underpins her approach. In 2019, Monica co-founded the not-for-profit initiative Diversity and Inclusion in UK Nuclear. And I'm also joined by Michelle. Michelle is the director of Equal Pays, a gender equality consultancy dedicated to closing workplace pay gaps. With UK gender pay gap reporting regulation in force, although suspended for this year due to coronavirus, and possible ethnicity pay gap reporting in the future, and a workplace talent shortage looming, readdressing inequalities in the workplace is more important than ever, as we know, and you'll know as listeners of the Diverse Minds podcast. Michelle's unique understanding of employee engagement and workplace challenges enables her to embed practical application into her consultancy. In addition to working with employers, Michelle is also a passionate advocate for enabling women to get equal pay and close their gaps. She does this by supporting their equal pay investigations and teaching women workplace negotiation skills to allow them to get more of what they want. Michelle has over 10 years' experience of working at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the EHRC, and hold a Master's in Human Rights from the University of Manchester. Michelle is a regular contributor to numerous national business magazines, international conferences, a former Manchester resident now living in Spain. A huge welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us on today's show.
Now, I'm really grateful that you're here. So I introduced you using the bios that you gave me, but could you tell the listeners about, why you do what you do? So Monica, do you want to start? So what made you be the nuclear diversity and inclusion specialist?
Oh, well, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm the nuclear diversity and inclusion specialist. It's an area of interest that has grown for me and is deeply personal to me because I've worked in the nuclear sector since I left university, so since 2003. So this is an industry I've been in for over 16 years. And during that time, I've seen the face and the shape of the industry change a little bit, but movement around some facets of inclusion and diversity has felt slow to me. So being able to co-found an initiative that has created space to have the kinds of discussions that we need to have and to provide practical support in an area where people can actually exchange really good ideas and information so that real action is taken to really make progress in this area, to me, then if I can help make that happen, then that's why I'm doing it. If I'm honest, I just got really fed up of hearing the talk. Lots of people saying, well, we're really passionate and considerate around, diversity and inclusion, and we're going to do this, we're going to recruit that. But then it would just almost feel like an updated version of the same talk. And there is a lot more traction coming in the industry. There's targets around, there is a gender-specific target in terms of wanting to have 40% women in the UK's nuclear workforce by 2030, which is great. But there still aren't really any targets around anything else. It's kind of a statement around, we want to see things more reflective of society, but there is a growing recognition that in order to achieve that, then there needs to be some tangible work around it. So my part in creating this group, if that helps people make real progress and so that things start to change, then I'm happy to play my role in this.
Thanks, Monica. And I really hear you when you say people are just you got weary, you got tired of it, fed up of people having the same conversations. And I think lots of us, whether we work in diversity and inclusion or around it or have a passion around it, will definitely identify with that. Michelle, so what made you do what you do? And you've done a couple of things since I've known you. So I don't know if you want to talk about the way in which your business and also your sort of paid employment has worked.
Yeah, so I guess like most people, I fell into this area of work accidentally, but fortunately, I really enjoy it. So I spent about 12 years at the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And the work that I was doing there was around helping employers understand how the Equality Act works in practice in day-to-day business. So kind of translating the law into real life. And my area was very focused on gender equality. So the work I was doing was around preventing pregnancy and maternity discrimination, working on issues around implementing equal pay and closing the gender pay gap. And I found all of that really fascinating, really interesting. I came into that sector not knowing very much, and I left knowing a lot more. And I decided when I had my first baby that I'd kind of gotten sick of the office politics, and I was in a space where I felt that I wasn't being challenged enough or pushed enough in terms of what I could bring to the table. And so I decided that I wanted to go freelance. So voluntary redundancy came up and I took the opportunity to start my business. And so I started work on helping organisations close their gender pay gaps, because that was where my passion was, and that was what I wanted to focus on. But kind of as a sideline, I quickly became the go-to person for lots of friends and colleagues who wanted help in understanding how to do well in interviews and how to negotiate for more money. And I was always the person that brought that up. It was always a surprise to people when I'd coach them through their interview techniques, etc. And then I'd say, okay, let's talk about money. And they'd be like, well, what do you mean? And I'd say, you can ask for more. And so what I started to see was a pattern of mainly women not knowing that they could negotiate, and then feeling a lot of fear around that, a lot of angst around, or is it okay? How will I be perceived? What if there's backlash? And all these types of things were coming up. So because I saw this pattern, I realised that actually there was a real need for women to know what their rights were in work, but also to understand that it's okay to ask for more, whether that's more money, more flexibility, or more of whatever it is that they need to keep their career trajectory going. And so, as well as doing the gender pay gap work with organisations, I started working with individual women to upskill them in the area of negotiation. It's been quite interesting delving into conversations with them around their fears, but it's also been amazing to see some of the great results that they've been getting, whether it's something really small that makes them feel really proud, all the way up to negotiating for more money and more flexibility. So yeah, that's in a nutshell how I've kind of fallen into this line of work.
Thank you both. And it's been brilliant connecting with you on LinkedIn and seeing your posts. And you just put such valuable content out there. So I think it's just so valuable. And so what do you think are some of the key lessons you've learned on your leadership journey? So there's your journey that brought you to do what you do. Maybe it's accidental, but there's clearly a lot of passion there. But what do you think are some of the key lessons you've learned on your leadership journeys that you'd like to share with our listeners? Michelle?
I think the first thing is to remember that leaders look different. I think sometimes we get into this headspace of thinking that leaders always look like people who are managers of other people, or that they're suited and booted, they're white, they're male, they talk a certain way, and it's almost like a stereotype. I mean, if you were to type in Google Images leader, all the typical stock photos may come up. And I think sometimes that we all forget that actually we're all leaders in our own right, somewhere. It may not necessarily be at work. You might be a leader, in your community, in your church, in your homes. But even if you're not managing people at work, that doesn't mean that you don't have leadership qualities and that you can't display them. And I think alongside understanding that is understanding that anything that you can bring to the table is of value to somebody, and somebody somewhere will appreciate what it is that you're doing. And so it's always okay to speak up and to speak your mind or to put suggestions on the table. And it took me a long time to realize that what I had to say was of value. And the thing that used to happen to me all the time is that I would be in meetings and I'd be too scared to put my opinion across. And then somebody else would say the same thing, and everybody around the table would be nodding, saying what a fantastic idea that was. And I'd be thinking, I thought of that idea, but I thought it was common sense, or I talked myself out of it for one reason or another. And so now I'm in a place where I just think, if I've got something to say, I'm going to say it, because somebody somewhere needs to hear it from me. And I think I would be doing people a disservice if I didn't share what I know. So I guess in a nutshell, it's around, don't think that because you don't have the title of leader that you're not a leader, because you probably are in some way, shape or form. And it's 100% safe for you to show up and to say what's on your mind and to give value.
Thank you, because I've got a course called the Mentally Healthy Leader, an online course, and I had to change the name of it because people didn't think it was for them because of the word leader. So thank you for saying that, because I think you're absolutely right. You lead your own life. I always go on about this whole thing. You are the CEO of your own life. So who's on your board? So I couldn't agree more with you, Michelle. Thank you. And Monica, how about you? Your leadership lessons?
Oh, how long have we got? I think it's very much a journey, because obviously, my background is I'm a chartered engineer, and in my day job, I work with a lot of engineering consultancies, construction companies, and with working in those sorts of environments and in those sorts of sectors, you unknowingly develop some self-direction and self-leadership skills. And I think touching on what Michelle was saying about not always recognizing in yourself that you have those qualities and those skills, that's definitely something I've realized over the years as my career's progressed and as I've got involved with other initiatives and projects over the years. So I think, my first lesson or thing I'd love to share with people is, you learn on a leadership journey, you learn a lot about others and you learn about yourself, and you continue to learn as you go along. And I've felt over the years when I've been leading teams, whether it's in my day job leading a bid team or working with my client teams, or now doing more work around inclusion, my role as a leader is always to facilitate a great environment so that my team can thrive. And in the past, that's meant sometimes I've acted as a bit of a shield or a buffer when there has been office politics and things like that going on. And I guess it's the expression of kind of having that, visibility and accountability, so that, issues that I guess are making speech marks now are at my pay grade, that I was the one who was actually dealing with it and that I showed up for my team. And I think that that's always really, really important, because if people don't feel supported or backed by you, they're not necessarily going to share with you what some of their aspirations might be. And then in turn, if you want to lead them, coach them, support them and help them, you're not going to be able to do much of that. I've also learned around leadership that it's just really important to listen and to understand what different people want from their careers, and that sometimes the career path they want to pursue could look wildly different to anything I've ever seen before, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not possible or that it's a fantasy. And I just think it's really important to work out and help people understand how it is they can get there, and to be the one who is on their side. And I've learned to use my voice, my influence, if I've got it, to help them, so that way they're able to sort of figure out their own path, but I can sort of back them and support them and maybe help open some doors or help them push on some doors that maybe weren't necessarily always open to me. I also think I really had to learn a level of self-awareness, and I don't necessarily think that's something that's always given to you or drilled into you when you first get put into different leadership positions. I mean, I've worked in quite corporate environments. I still work with a lot of corporate businesses, and we are seeing more conversations now around emotional intelligence, but it still feels a little bit like that real self-awareness piece of understanding, are you actually leading or are you actually hindering people? Are you actually listening or are you showing a bit of bias? And it's actually having that real true self-awareness and, just actually saying to yourself, yeah, you're not doing a great job, or you don't have the answer on this, or you do have the answer on this. And, realizing that it's actually okay to be a little bit vulnerable as a leader, and that it's okay to be considerate of other people. And I think it's very much around not necessarily fitting that stereotype of you've got to be hard-nosed, cracking the whip in order to get things done. There is very much a number of different ways in which you can lead and lead really effectively and help people achieve their goals and achieve your own goals.
Thanks, Monica. Yes, I totally with you there. I think what you said is really powerful, and the point about listening, and that's another thing that I always go on about, especially when I do mental health and wellbeing courses, is that how do you have a productive conversation about mental health? People look really blank, but you're not just talking about mental health or mental ill health, but in the workplace and supporting your teams, but listening and thinking, well, this isn't the way I do it, but there's lots of ways to do it, and I need to listen in order to enable that person to get to where they want to be. So thank you. I think that's super helpful. And then clearly we're just navigating our way through as a the globe around COVID-19 coronavirus. Some countries have come out of lockdown, some countries have opened things up, but one of the conversations in the UK that I saw particularly on LinkedIn is that equality and diversity hasn't gone away. So whilst people are working remotely or they're working at home, how do you think workplaces can continue to navigate equity, equality and fairness during this time, or any examples that you want to share of good practice? And feel free to both unmute your mic if you like, so we can talk about it all together.
I'll go first. I think one of the things that I've seen in different formats in LinkedIn, which has made me chuckle slightly, is people coming out and saying, isn't it interesting that every time you asked for some form of flexible working, you were told that you couldn't do the job from home and it was impossible, and basically go away and stop asking. And now all of a sudden you're working from home every day. Now, obviously, it's what I like to call, enforced remote working. It's not, nobody's chosen this. But I think this is, as we're navigating through all of the repercussions of the coronavirus, and there are so many, I think this is a real eye-opener, and it's very much that thing of being forced to take some medicine before realising that actually maybe I should have taken this medicine beforehand. So we're going to have, I think, a lot of firms who realise that, working from home as our form of flexible working is not the only one. It's not actually as terrible as they made out. And on the flip side, you're going to have a lot of people realising that, they can do their jobs from home, and maybe they want to have a change in the way that they approach work after this has all died down. But I guess in terms of kind of equality and diversity, organizations are going to have to really think long and hard about, well, how can they use this as an opportunity to address some of the issues that they've probably brushed under the carpet. I did read a quote that somebody had said on LinkedIn, and it was talking about how this is an opportunity for employers to be much more supportive of, people who need extra support to be able to do their jobs, in terms of, embracing the technology that's out there, whether it's for, disability reasons or because, they've got family responsibilities and just can't do the commute every day, whatever the issue is. But I think this is about employers taking a long, hard look at how they've done things this far, and are there aspects that they can now change to ensure that the diversity and inclusion agenda doesn't slip off the radar? Because I think it would be a shame to view this as something that they were forced to do, but only for a time, and then we're going to go back to the way things were afterwards. It's actually a real opportunity, almost like a lived experience for them to think, oh, well, actually, it's not as bad as we thought it was, and here are some benefits. And, as a side, we can help to close some of our disability gaps. We can help to close our gender pay gaps. We can, start to address some of the, kind of race issues in the workplace. So I'm hoping that, some employers will see this as an opportunity to look at this through that lens and put this at the top of their agenda.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Michelle. I think we're at a point where there's a real opportunity for a lot of businesses to actually really examine it, really examine what is it we need to do in order to operate as a business. And there's so many things and so many parts they can truly examine now and say, well, wait a minute, we're now working remotely. We understand people are productive from their homes. Does this now open up a new and broader talent pool into the business moving forward? But I think for this to happen, it does need to obviously be on people's minds. And I think it's really important that it remains on people's agenda, and that we also maybe don't get the inverse happening whereby potentially remote working could further exacerbate any sort of inequalities that exist within a working structure as well. Because, I think it'd just be really awful if maybe someone's working somewhere where maybe there's quite a bit of systemic inequality already within the working culture. And if they've simply then replicated it into the remote model without any examination of, well, actually, what can we change? What can we do differently? What can we do better? How do we encouraging at the best out of everybody? Then all that's going to happen is what was happening in person is just going to happen via the internet or not via the internet. And that opportunity is lost and things don't become better. And I think to avoid that, I think a number of organisations will need to make sure the different leaders in the business have the tools and the skills, to lead their teams inclusively anyway, but also get some further support and training around actual remote management or remote team management, because, as we've picked up on with the whole sort of situation that's gone on over the past few months, this remote working situation was kind of just dropped on people. And in some cases, it literally was overnight, chatting with some friends where some of them literally got text messages or phone calls saying, don't report to the office tomorrow, you're now working from home. And it was like, oh, right. And, nobody was saying, well, how long for? And, they weren't sure when they were going to get computer equipment and all these other things. So I think it's really about making sure people have the training, the support, the information so they can actually lead the teams and understand that framework. And that is okay to admit if you don't necessarily have the skills, but you can go somewhere to get the support so that then you can actually lead people really well and correctly during this point.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? Both of your points. Firstly, around, oh no, you can't work from home. You've got to go through this long process. We've got to get HR. I've got to rubber stamp it to, as you said, Monica, text message, don't come in. Oh, well, I haven't got my folders. Will I be able to come in? When will I be able to come in? And none of that being there. And also your point, Monica, about how, if we don't get it right in the physical face-to-face workplace and suddenly everyone's working from home, things that were untoward or inequitable, unfair aren't suddenly overnight going to disappear. You're right, they're going to move online. So thinking about those principles of inclusion, inclusive meetings, etc., you need to think about it in the online space as well. And I totally think that a lot of workplaces aren't set up for this, because I've spoken to managers who've been so stressed out because their teams do not have the right equipment, they do not have the things that they need, and yet they suddenly have to manage remotely and they've still got the same pressures. And that isn't realistic, is it?
No, I don't think it is realistic for a number of people. And I think it's also that recognition of, if you were approaching someone to say, actually, can I work flexibly, can I work remotely, and more usual circumstances. And, for say my friends who are working parents, normally they'd have childcare because their children would be, say, in nursery or at school. But, in recent weeks, the schools here in the UK have been closed. A lot of the nurseries are closed, et cetera, et cetera. So people are doing full-time parenting on top of also doing a job and managing remote teams. And they've got other care responsibilities and other things going on. And there is a lot of pressure on people. And I think there just needs to be that recognition of what support and skills do people need to navigate through that. Because I think without acknowledging it, there's a danger of either overloading people or just, people potentially walking away from this thinking, oh, it didn't work because I was just really, really stressed and overworked all the time, when actually you were actually just trying to do too much. And if you just get that help and that realism into it of, well, actually, these are the tasks that need to be done, this is the help that's needed, and this is what's a realistic workload in light of all of the circumstances and everything that's on my plate at the moment, then I think people can approach it in a way that's healthy for them and mentally healthy for them as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think also there's this piece around being able to admit when you don't have all the answers. I mean, this has caught everybody by surprise. So I think it's okay as a line manager, as an employer, to hold your hands up and say, we weren't prepared for this, and we don't know what we're doing. And so, like you said, Monica, it's okay to seek that help. And I don't know if you saw it, but I put a post on LinkedIn because I was really angry. I was in a Facebook group, and this woman was talking about how her employer was expecting her to put in 7 hours every day at home. Mm-hmm. Her husband was also at home every day, and his employer was expecting him to do the same thing. But they also have children, so she was at her wit's end because she was saying, I don't know what to do. Do I have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do my work and then go to bed at midnight? And I could just hear the desperation in her voice. And so I paraphrased the story on LinkedIn. And I was just basically kind of pleading with employers and saying, look, this is the time to, use your common sense and have some compassion, because how you manage your teams now is going to be what people remember you for during this period. And in 6 to 8 months' time, when we have some semblance of normality, whatever that looks like, people are going to be evaluating, were they a good employer to me? Was my line manager empathetic? Was I given the space to figure out how I can make this work? Was I given a listening ear to be able to talk about my challenges? Was I trusted and treated like an adult? Or was I continued to be micromanaged? Were there unrealistic expectations? These are the things that are going to stick with people. And I really do believe that, firms' brand reputations are going to be made during this period. And so this is one of the reasons why I've been working on a remote working toolkit, which talks about not only the kind of technology aspects of how to ensure that everybody can do their work, but looks at the emotional side around how can you support your teams, because this is not how we would do it if people were asking for remote working. This is, everybody's going through, all sorts of struggles, and we're in a position where people's home life and work life has just been smashed together at 100 miles an hour, and that can be really tricky to handle. I'm not employed, I'm self-employed, but I'm struggling with being at home with my 6-year-old and 20-month-old every day, and I don't have an employer to answer to, but I'm having problems. So I do sometimes really feel for people who are not being given the space that they need to just try and figure out what is realistic. And I do think this is an opportunity for managers to address how they manage and to think about how they can think outside the box and be much more supportive. And if they can be more supportive, then people will show up for them as and when they can. And I think the focus needs to be less on the hours put in and more on, okay, what are you able to produce? And let's work a plan around that and trust each other to be able to get it right in this time.
Oh, I so agree. So agree with you, Michelle, I think. And that's something I've definitely learned over the years, because like yourself, I mean, I work for myself via my own consultancy, and I've done quite a bit of this work, usually from home for some of my clients, mixed in with sometimes some sitting in their offices. But something I really had to learn was to avoid really focusing in on the exactly how people were going to get things done, and start trusting if someone told me, yes, it's realistic for me to give you this document by 2 p.m. on Thursday, for example, and just trusting that if that's their realistic schedule, then that's okay. And then I had to learn to really focus on the output, that they were going to do the work that they promised to do. And it wasn't necessarily always my concern if it meant they were maybe doing 1 hour in the morning or 1 hour in an evening, because that worked around their schedule and everything else that was going on with them. And just really learned to focus on my job being making sure they had everything they needed so they could do a good job. But it does take a mental shift in terms of just saying it's okay, I can, building that trust and that relationship with people and understanding that, they will get on with the job, because at the end of the day, that if you're able to get on and do the job, and, other people will be able to do it as well, if that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. And also thinking about what's due to different people. And what I mean by that is that, people have rights, and I'm child free and I'm struggling. I struggled during lockdown. So what does that say? But
you're human.
But different people need different things, and to look at that at a case by case basis and try and be as flexible as possible. And like you said, it's not about you're there at your computer from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. because we've all seen it in the offices, haven't we? I've had reports from people that they've seen HR directors playing solitaire. So I'm not accusing anyone of anything here, but just because you're in front of your computer doesn't mean you are productive. Or, I'm using computer as an example, but in any job really, if you're in front of your tools, that doesn't mean that you're productive, but it's how you're given the space to do that. And of course, we were talking about it before we started recording this podcast, but about the experience particularly of global majority or Black and Asian staff members. And as someone that's done work on pay negotiation and pay gaps, Michelle, what are both of your, if you've got 3 tips, what are your 3 tips as Black women on negotiating and getting what should be yours? Because I'm putting my money on it that we will have had Black and Asian staff working extra hard. We've seen it in the NHS. They paid the toll for it. There've been higher death rates in Black communities. But what are the ways in which Black people can negotiate what should be theirs, and they might have been putting in those extra hours when they go back into a face-to-face situation in the workplace?
Okay, I'll go first. I think the first thing is to acknowledge to yourself what your worth is, and it can be very easy to do all of the extra hours, to do the extra work, and to feel reticent around raising the fact that you've gone the extra mile and you've done extra things. And so I think the first thing is to be very clear with yourself and be honest with yourself about what it is that you bring to the table. A really good exercise is to go through the work that you've done in the last sort of 12 to 24 months and note it down. And you probably have done a lot more than you give yourself credit for, because it just becomes the norm. And like I was saying before, when all of this dies down, there's going to be a lot of self-reflection for a lot of people around job satisfaction. Are they satisfied with their jobs? Do they feel valued? How were they treated? And so a lot of people might find themselves in a position where, the answers to those questions are really negative. So they will either want to negotiate in their workplace for more so that they feel happier, or they might decide that they want to leave. And so going back to what I was saying about understanding your worth, you then need to kind of translate that into, well, what is it that you want to negotiate for? And for some people, it will be money, and that's perfectly fine. But depending on where you are in your life, there'll be other things that are important to you that will give you a sense of satisfaction, that will give you the things that you need to help your career move forward. So that may be, some form of flexible working, however that looks. You might want an increase in your personal development budget. You might want your work to pay for a specific course for you. There's all sorts of things that you can negotiate for. But the key for me is to note down what that looks like for you, and to not feel that you only have to ask for money, but to ask for the things that are important to you right now. And the other thing I would say is to not be disheartened if you hear a no. What I always say to people is that if you don't get what you want, then there's lessons there for you. So lessons for you to learn around, what could you do better? But if you get a no, then you can ask that person that you're negotiating with, what is it that I need to do to get closer to a yes? And because from there, you can learn a lot about what it is that you need to work on, what can you improve on. And it also sets the signal in their minds that you are serious and that you're probably going to be coming back in 4 to 6 months' time, having done that stuff and asking again. So they're the kind of top 3 tips I would go with.
Thanks, Michelle. That's super useful. I like the phrase you use about, okay, what can I do for it to be a yes, or to get closer to yes next time? Monica, how about you?
Oh, what can I add to that? I mean, those are really fantastic tips. And, when I was just sort of reflecting on that as Michelle was speaking, I remember some advice that a male colleague once gave me. He always said to me, always aim high when you're going to go into negotiations. He always said, aim high. If you are wanting to ask for more money, he said, aim high, and always, whatever figure you think you might want, always add some more to it. Because chances are you probably are pitching yourself too low. So like Michelle was saying, have that sense of your worth. And if it is translating into money, aim high, because at the end of the day, if you open with the figure in your head that you'd be happy as kind of a minimum to walk away with, and then you get negotiated down, you might walk away feeling a little bit deflated or questioning kind of how you feel or your value, if that's what happens. I really agree with the tip around, approaching any sort of discussion like this is turn up with the receipts, turn up with the cold hard evidence, turn up with the facts, have some clear examples of when you've done really great work. Ask people if can provide testimonials for you. For example, really pull that evidence pack together so that if someone says, well, I'm not sure you've done this, you've got it there typed up in black and white. So it's harder for them to dispute that you've not put the work in. And also just, really be prepared to also have that information with you as well. And just, also think about presenting it in a format that, works with the person you're negotiating with. I've had some managers in the past who weren't big fans of certain Word documents, but they like stuff more in PowerPoint, for example. So also just think a little bit about the person, the human who you're interacting with, and just think about, well, what do I know they like to read? What are the kinds of things they like to receive? Would they prefer to have certain things in an email first before we sit down? And those sorts of things as well. And then I think my other tip would be just listen, and really listen during any sort of discussion. Listen to understand their position or understand any objections that they might have, so that you can understand, if they do turn around and say no on this occasion and you sort of leave the table, at least you can understand, well, what is it I need to close down, or what is it potentially I need to do differently, so that I turn that no into a yes moving forward. And it's very much around seeking, well, what's the win-win? I don't know if you've read the book by, is it Stephen Covey?
Yeah.
It talks very much around sort of the win-win scenario, and it's very much understanding, well, what does a win look like to me? And like Michelle was saying, it might be that you want to have more training support, or a budget altered, or you might want to finish a little bit earlier some days, or it could be that you do want more money. But it's actually really understanding, well, what's the win for me? But then also looking at that and saying, well, if I'm asking for this, how can I show them where the win is for them on their side from me asking for those things, so that then that way everybody feels they walk away with something.
Yeah, that whole point about reciprocity. I wish it didn't always have to be there, but I think realistically, you're right. I think there does have to be that quid pro quo exchange in some way. And you're right, it's not always about money either, is it? It's about that, do I want flexible working, which do I want to work from home, which is an easy win right now. But going forward for the future, do I want to keep the arrangements I have? How can I show that I was productive? What else might I need for this arrangement to be in place?
For sure. But I think also maybe want to caveat this a little bit. I mean, when we're having this discussion, we've got to face facts. We're talking as if we're entering into a negotiating environment where we start on an equal footing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, if you are working in a team, because there will be people listening to this who maybe there are issues going on. There are managers who maybe just aren't the biggest fans, and they'll be thinking, well, that's great, you're telling me to go in with all this evidence. I've done that before, but I still keep hearing no, because there is prejudice at play. So it's, if that is someone's reality, what between us can we potentially share as some useful tips for people in those situations?
Yes, that's a tricky one. As I was listening to what you were saying, I was thinking exactly the same thing. I think for me there are two things. The first is, I read a really good tip, and somebody was saying that sometimes when you want to negotiate for something, whether it's promotion, pay rise, whatever, it's not always your line manager that you need to impress, it's their line manager. And I think the reasoning behind that, this person was saying, is that if you can impress their line manager, it makes it less difficult for them to say no to your request, because saying no to your request makes it look like it's less of a business no and more of a personal no. So that's one thing. So I guess in that sense, it's around understanding who your other allies are in the workplace. So forming relationships, not just with your line manager, but with other people that may be of use to you in some way, shape or form. And I guess, that's good general advice for anybody who wants to progress in their career, in any organisation, in terms of building relationships with other people, and seeing how they can kind of help open doors for you or put in a good word for you, etc. The other thing around this, obviously, being very frank here in saying that, there are workplaces where there are issues around prejudice towards, people from Black and minority ethnic communities, and it's a really tough one because, I've experienced it. I've seen, great people from these backgrounds who are just not given the credit that they deserve. They're treated badly, and there comes a point where you just think to yourself, there can only be one reason for this, and it does boil down to race.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, and I really hate kind of saying this, but sometimes, if it is really that bad, unfortunately, it is about finding somewhere else. And I say this, to anybody who negotiates, that sometimes you do hit that brick wall. And yes, there will be organisations who eventually will, change practices or, put things in place to be more supportive. But, we're human beings, and there's only so much you can do, and there's only so much you can take. And I guess everybody, has their own gut instincts, and you'll know when you've gone as far as you can, when you've put in as much as you can. And sometimes, unfortunately, the answer is that, you need to find somebody that values you, because you're at that stage where you value yourself and they're not willing to treat you properly. There's lots of discrimination going on. And then the question becomes, well, do you want to stay there? And it's not the answer that I want to give, but sometimes you do have to be pragmatic around, understanding what people's positions are and the situations that they find themselves in the workplace.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Michelle, and I'm really glad you said that, because you were saying you've been in that situation. I've been in that situation. That's why I run my own business, because I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I remember I got a paper accepted into a conference, a global equality and diversity conference in 2011 to Canada, and my line manager at the time refused to even let me apply for funding to go. Now, there was deep jealousy. There was all sorts of things going on there, and of course, my decision was then to leave. It took me a long time to get out, but I did it, and actually there was no other alternative. So I do think you have to protect yourself, because your mental health is at stake, and the microaggressions and the racism and prejudice, even if it's not, as I say, it's not BNP members of the BNP holding placards outside your workplace usually, although I appreciate that can happen, but the subtle daily microaggressions are exhausting, and they have a huge impact, and they erode you as an individual, and they erode your confidence. So yes, I'm pleased you said that, because if anyone's listening and they're struggling, we're not saying run for the hills, but you do have to think about how to protect yourself and what that looks like.
Yeah, I think, and I was thinking about it the other day, and I was thinking it's almost like gaslighting, because sometimes when you then raise the issues, you're then made to feel that you're the person that's in the wrong, or how awful of you to bring this to my attention. I don't want to have to deal with it. And you're kind of like, but I'm on the receiving end of this. Yeah. But I think, we need to give ourselves more credit when it comes to listening to your intuition. You know that your workplace, how far you can go, how much effort you put in. When it's time to go, but you also know when you can push on the door a little bit more and get people to understand what they're doing and the impact that it has. So trust your gut instinct on this one, I would say.
Yeah, totally.
Agree. And I think it's just really important, like you said, that we do need to protect ourselves. You know, we do need to protect our mental health in these situations. And just to pick up on a point you were making, Michelle, about looking for allies in the workplace, I think something that helped me sort of in a lot in sort of previous jobs when I was able to sort of negotiate and make career progression, it was actually those relationships in the workplace, and I guess, you know, developing relationships with different people who then in turn acted almost as executive sponsors for me, who advocated for me when I wasn't in the room. And it was people who were willing to sort of use their influence to help me. And that made a massive difference to my career. And, you know, it's easy for me to sit here and say that to people because, you know, you might not feel you know those people, but you'll also be quite surprised sometimes by who might be willing to help you, support you, mentor you. I mean, some of the best mentors I've had over the years, I just asked the question. I was a little bit cheeky, I guess, and I asked people, you know, can I get a little bit of your time? Can you help me? And it's amazing the help that people will give you and just the influence that they might, I guess, confer onto your career progression as well.
Thank you, Monica. Yes, I think you've summed that up really well. You're absolutely spot on. And yes, we do have to look after our mental health because unfortunately no one else is going to do it for us. And with services being cut, it's vital that we do as much as we can ourselves and do that in a proactive way. So thank you so much for sharing all your insights and your tips to help people transition back to the face-to-face workplace. And so if people want to find out more about what you do and work with you, how should they contact you? And of course, I'll include all these details in the show notes.
Yes, I'll go first. I tend to live on LinkedIn. It's my favourite place to be. So you can find me, Michelle Jimler, on LinkedIn. I also have a website, which is equalitypays.uk. So yeah, they're the two places that you can find me with my general musings about gender pay gap, ethnicity pay gap, all sorts of things, negotiation.
Thanks, Michelle. Monica?
Similar, really. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Monica Mwanje. I'll spell my surname, Mwanje, though I know you'll also have it in the show notes as well, Layla. So yeah, LinkedIn. I have my company website, www.mmcslimited.com. So that's for my consultancy, and there are links there to some of the other work that I'm doing as well. And I also like to tweet a little bit as well, not loads, so people can always look me up on Twitter too.
Yeah, I like your Twitter, Monica. Don't do yourself down. So I hope this has been a really useful episode for you if you're listening, particularly if you're Black and Asian professional, Black and or Asian professional, just to know your worth, to realise what you've done, go in with evidence, trust your intuition and look after your mental health. And I just want to say thank you so much again to Monica and Michelle. Really value you being here, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.